Baby, sometimes the people who claim to love you will speak death over your life, but God will still whisper, get up. I'm not done with you yet. Now listen here, sugar. Life has a funny way of showing you who really stands with you when the floor drops out from under your feet. I remember that night like it was stitched into my bones, the shouting, the door slamming, the cold air hitting my baby's face. But I also remember something stronger, the fire inside me that said, this ain't your ending, this is your beginning. And 1 year later, oh honey, let me tell you what a difference 12 months, a little faith, and a whole lot of determination can make. When someone throws you out, do not throw yourself away. That truth unfolded for me on a night when the sky felt heavy and my heart felt like it had been shattered on the floor. I stood outside with my child in my arms and the words still ringing in my ears felt like they had claws. The door slammed behind us with a force that told me I was no longer welcome in a place I had once called home. I felt the cold air hit my skin and for a moment I believed that maybe he was right. Maybe I was nothing. Maybe my future was gone. Maybe my child would suffer because of his rage. But then something deep inside me whispered that this was not the end. It was a beginning that arrived dressed as disaster. I took a breath and it felt sharp like it was cutting through the fear inside me. My child shifted in my arms and that tiny movement reminded me that someone still needed me to stand tall. Someone still needed me to breathe. Someone still needed me to fight. So I made a choice in that moment. I would not throw myself away just because he had tossed us out like we were trash. His opinion of me was not truth. His anger was not prophecy. His cruelty was not destiny. I looked up at that dark sky and I told myself that though I felt broken I was not done. Sometimes life will push you out of a door because it knows you would never leave on your own. Sometimes comfort becomes a cage. Sometimes love becomes a shadow that hides the danger of staying. And sometimes the shove that feels like a punishment is really the push that saves your life. That night felt like an ending, but it was actually the moment I stepped into a future I never would have found if he had not forced me to walk. I walked down that street with nothing but a bag over my shoulder and a baby on my hip. I could feel the weight of judgment trying to crush my spine. Every step felt like it asked me, are you sure you can do this? Are you sure you can survive? Are you sure you are strong enough? And every step I answered yes, even if my voice shook. I kept walking because I knew if I stopped for too long the fear would root itself in my body and freeze me in place. I refused to freeze. I refused to fall apart. When someone throws you out, you face a choice that most people never see until they are pushed to the edge. You decide whether you will see yourself through their hate or through your own truth. You decide whether you collapse or stand. You decide whether you let their voice become your own. That is the moment you choose your life. That is the moment you become your own protection. I spent that first night sitting on a small bench outside a closed store with my child curled against me. My body ached. My mind raced. I felt like the world had grown too big, too dark, too cold. Yet in the middle of all that pain I found something steady inside myself. A strength that had always been there but had been smothered by years of trying to make someone else happy. A strength that reminded me that I existed long before he came into my life and I would exist long after he walked out of it. Every time my baby stirred I promised silently that I would never let anyone make me forget who I was again. I would not let anyone tell me that I was worthless. I would not let anyone paint my future with their bitterness. I would not let anyone speak curses over my life and convince me those curses could stick. We were thrown out of a house not out of hope. Morning came and with it came decisions. Hard ones, scary ones, but they were mine to make. I walked us to the nearest shelter. I filled out forms. I answered questions. I swallowed my pride more times than I could count. Every step was uncomfortable, yet I felt myself growing stronger with each one. When someone throws you out, they expect you to crumble. They expect you to lose direction. They expect you to fail so they can justify their cruelty. But what they do not expect is for you to rise. I found work. It was not glamorous. It did not pay much. But it kept us fed, and that was enough to build on. I learned how to stretch resources in ways I had never imagined before. I learned how to lean on people who wanted nothing from me except to see me succeed. I learned how to breathe again without fear tightening around my chest. I learned how to speak gently to myself instead of echoing his harsh words. The woman I was becoming felt new and powerful. A woman forged through fire. What people throw away does not lose value. It simply finds a new place to shine. I became that truth. I woke up every morning feeling tired yet determined. I looked at my child and reminded myself that I was building not just my own life but theirs as well. I chose to believe that being thrown out was not the proof of my failure but the doorway to my freedom. Sometimes the thing that feels like devastation is really deliverance. 1 year passed and with each day I grew further away from the version of myself that trembled on that dark street. I realized I had begun to thank God for the very moment that once felt like destruction. If I had stayed in that house I would have shrunk more and more until there was nothing left of me but fear. If I had stayed I would have taught my child that love accepted cruelty. If I had stayed I would have lost myself piece by piece. Being thrown out saved me. It forced me to choose myself. It forced me to rise. And here is what I learned above all else. When someone throws you out it reveals their character but it also reveals yours. Their action shows their weakness. Your response shows your strength. They may slam a door on you yet that sound can wake up every ounce of power you forgot you possessed. They may try to make you feel small yet the journey you take afterward will show you just how big your spirit really is. So when someone throws you out do not throw yourself away. Pick yourself up. Dust off the hurt. Gather your courage. Remind yourself that you are allowed to start over. Remind yourself that you can build something better than what you lost. Remind yourself that you are not defined by someone who could not love you right. Stand tall even if your knees shake. Move forward even if the path feels steep. Believe in yourself far louder than they disbelieved in you. Because the truth is this. The world does not end when someone walks away. It begins when you decide to keep going without them. You become stronger. You become wiser. You become whole. Being thrown out is not the end of your story. It is simply the chapter where you rise. Your child becomes what you show, not what someone else spews. That truth settled into my spirit during those first fragile months after we were pushed out of that house and shoved into a world that felt sharp and foreign. I kept hearing his voice echo in my memory, trying to stitch itself into my identity, trying to stain the future of my child with his bitterness. But I made a choice. I decided that my baby would learn from my actions, not from his insults. I understood that children watch more than they listen. They feel the tone of your heart even when they cannot yet understand the words that float around them. So every day from that moment forward I lived with intention. I knew my baby was studying me through every breath and every step, whether I felt strong or not. In those early days I was scared. I was unsure. I was exhausted in a way that sank deep into my bones. Yet every moment I held on to the belief that I was shaping my child's understanding of strength. I wanted my child to see that even when life cuts deep a person can still rise. When we woke up in that shelter with the sound of other families stirring and the rough scent of bleach and morning struggle all around us, I looked into my child's eyes and smiled. I was shaking inside but I smiled anyway. My child needed to see hope even in chaos. They needed to feel that we still had a future worth fighting for. I stopped letting his words roll around in my mind because I knew they could poison the way I moved through the world. If I let his voice linger, my child would hear defeat in my silence. So instead I filled our little days with small acts of courage. I whispered to my child that they were loved. I whispered that they were safe. I whispered that nothing spoken in anger by someone who should have protected us would ever define who they were meant to be. I was not speaking to comfort only my baby. I was also speaking to the broken woman inside myself. With every whispered truth I reshaped the story of who we were becoming. Children absorb the world through their senses. They learn from the energy around them long before they understand any kind of logic. So even though our circumstances were rough, I kept our spirit gentle. I would rock my child when fear tried to creep into my mind. I would hum little tunes in the dim light of the shelter room. I understood that the feeling of being loved could build walls inside a child's heart that no insult could ever tear down. I wanted my baby to grow up believing in kindness and courage, not in the cruelty they had been born into. As I worked those long days to earn a little money, I reminded myself that my child was learning by example. They watched me get up even when I barely had the strength. They watched me put on clothes washed in a tiny sink. They watched me gather them in my arms every night with gratitude that we made it through another day. My actions were forming the blueprint of their character. I wanted that blueprint to be filled with perseverance and dignity and light. Sometimes at night when exhaustion pressed down on me, I would think about his words again. He had meant to wound me. He had meant to carve a scar into our future. But all those words really did was remind me of how much I needed to protect my child's mind from the world that had tried to devalue me. I knew that if my child grew up hearing me repeat his insults or seeing me shrink under the weight of his attacks, then I would be feeding the very poison I wanted to escape. So I refused to carry those insults into our new life. I filled our home, whatever form it took, with tenderness and respect. Even if the home was a shared room with old paint and a flickering light. I would hold my child close and speak with patience. I wanted them to see that love does not shout. Love does not throw people away. Love does not call names meant to crush a spirit. When a child experiences real love, they learn to expect nothing less from the world. They grow into adults who do not cling to those who mistreat them. They learn early what a healthy home feels like, even if the walls are thin and the meals are simple. As months passed, I saw something beautiful happen. My child smiled more. They reached for me with trust. They laughed at the little silly moments in our long days. Those small sparks taught me something powerful. A child's joy does not depend on luxury. It depends on safety. It depends on the emotional climate you create. So every time I felt fear creep into me, I asked myself, what lesson is my baby learning from me right now? Am I teaching them faith or fear? Am I teaching them to stand or crumble? Am I teaching them to see themselves as worthy or worthless? That question guided every step I took. I realized that I was becoming the mirror my child looked into. If I looked defeated, they would see defeat. If I looked determined, they would see possibility. So I walked with purpose even on days when my heart felt bruised. I let my child see me try and try again. I let them see me smile through the struggle. I let them see me treat strangers with respect and myself with compassion. My child watched me grow, and because they saw me grow, they began to grow too. 1 year later, I look at my child and I see none of the darkness he predicted. I see curiosity. I see joy. I see trust. I see resilience blooming like light through cracks in a wall. And I know that it did not come from what was thrown at us, but from what I chose to show. The world tried to label us, but I built new labels with my own hands. My child is not a reflection of his anger. They are a reflection of my love, my effort, my choices, my hope, and that is the truth no insult can ever erase. You can cry, just do not unpack there. That lesson became the lifeline I clung to during the hardest nights of my life. When everything fell apart, I felt a wave of grief crash over me, so strong that for a moment I thought it would pull me completely under. Tears came without warning. They came in heavy streams that soaked my pillow and my shirt and sometimes the little blanket wrapped around my child. I cried from fear. I cried from shock. I cried from a hurt so deep it felt like it carved new spaces inside me. And for a time I believed that maybe all I could do was cry, because crying felt like the only thing that was still working inside me. Yet even in the middle of that flood, something inside whispered that the tears were not the enemy. The danger was staying stuck in the space where those tears were born. When I cried, I began to understand that I was releasing what I could no longer carry. But I also knew I could not build a life inside that sorrow. It was a place I needed to visit, not a place I was meant to live. I remember one night sitting on a worn mattress in a shelter room with my child asleep beside me. The air felt heavy and the room smelled faintly of detergent and worry. I felt so lost that I could hardly breathe. Tears slid down my face in hot silent tracks, and I let them fall because holding them in would have broken me even more. As I cried, I told myself that it was all right to feel all of it. The fear, the disappointment, the anger, the humiliation, the betrayal. I let every piece of my heart speak through those tears. Yet even in that moment I reminded myself that crying was not the end. It was a step on the path. A needed step, but not the final one. There were nights when I cried so hard that my throat ached like I had been shouting. Nights when my hands trembled because I could not imagine how I would make it to the next day. Nights when I felt so alone that the darkness seemed to swallow the room. And still I cried because those tears washed out the pain that might have turned into bitterness if I had tried to pretend I was fine. Grief is a river, not a wall. You let it flow through you so it does not drown you. What I learned was that crying is a release, not a residence. You do not build a home in the middle of your heartbreak. If you plant yourself in that place, you begin to believe the grief is all there is. You forget the possibility of sunrise. You forget the quiet strength waiting below the pain. You forget that healing lives on the other side of the tears. So every time I cried, I reminded myself that these tears were temporary. They belong to the moment, not to the future. People often treat crying like a weakness. They see tears as a sign that a person is falling apart. But I discovered that crying was proof that I still cared. Proof that I was still alive. Proof that my heart had not turned numb from the cruelty thrown at me. Tears softened the sharp edges inside me. They made space for hope to return later. They allowed me to acknowledge my wounds so I could eventually rise above them. Without those tears, I would have carried the hurt in silence, and that silence would have weighed more than any tear ever could. There were mornings when I woke up with my eyes swollen and my spirit tired. I would look at my child lying peacefully beside me, and I would force myself to breathe deep. I knew that I needed to move. I needed to get up. Crying was part of my process, but rising was part of my duty. My child needed strength and love and action and presence. They could not grow in the shadow of my despair. So even when my heart felt like it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces, I would wipe my face, pull myself together, and take one more step forward. Crying taught me to feel. Moving taught me to heal. I needed both. Sometimes I cried in bathrooms at work because the pressure was too much. Sometimes I cried while rocking my baby because I was so scared of failing. Sometimes I cried in the middle of the night because the world felt too heavy. But after every tear, I stood up again. Even when my legs shook, I stood anyway. Even when my mind whispered that I could not do it, I stood. And every time I rose after crying, I found a little more strength waiting for me. The truth is that life will break you at times. It will hit you in ways you never expected. It will shake you until you feel like the ground cannot hold you. Tears are the body's way of making space for the new strength that comes from surviving. They are the cleansing that happens before rebuilding. They are the rain that softens the soil for growth. But you cannot stay in that rain forever. You cannot pitch a tent in the storm. You cannot let sorrow become the map of your future. One of the hardest lessons I learned was that healing is active. It requires walking, not standing still. Even slow steps count. Even small steps matter. Even the days when all you can do is sit up and breathe are part of the journey. And crying does not erase progress. It simply prepares you for the next step. The danger is in letting the sorrow convince you that there is no next step. So I refused to let the sadness swallow me whole. I let it touch me but not claim me. As time passed, I realized that every tear that fell carried a little of the fear away with it. I was becoming lighter. I was becoming clearer. I was becoming someone who could feel deeply and still move forward. My child watched me, and even though they were too young to understand the details, they understood the rhythm. They saw that their mother could cry and still rise. They saw that falling down emotionally was not the end of the story. They saw that sadness did not erase love or hope or strength. And I wanted them to learn that lesson early. I wanted them to know that emotions are not enemies. They are teachers, but they must be honored without being worshipped. When I look back now, I do not see weakness in those long nights of crying. I see a woman fighting for her own soul. I see someone refusing to turn numb. I see someone emptying out the pain to make room for her future. I see someone who was determined to protect her child not only from the world outside but from the despair inside her. Crying was part of the transformation. It softened me in the right ways and strengthened me in the right places. You can cry, just do not unpack there. Do not build a life inside your heartbreak. Do not let sorrow become your address. Let the tears fall. Let the pain speak. Let the grief move through you. But when the tears finish their story, stand up again. Wipe your face. Straighten your back. Look toward the future that still belongs to you. You are allowed to visit the valley, but you are not meant to stay in it. You are meant to rise. Build a future out of the broken pieces. Those words became the map I followed when everything inside me felt shattered and scattered across a life I no longer recognized. When we left that house I felt like all I carried were fragments of who I used to be. Pieces of confidence, pieces of trust, pieces of dreams, pieces of a heart that had been bruised too many times. I felt like a glass that had been dropped on a hard floor, and all I could do was gather what was left. Yet as I knelt inside that darkness with my child pressed close to me, I learned something powerful. Broken pieces can become the foundation of a new life if you choose to pick them up and build instead of walking away from the mess. In the beginning I did not know where to start. I had no clear plan, no neat outline, no step-by-step guide. All I had was the determination not to let the person who threw us out decide who we would become. I understood that a future would not fall into my hands. It had to be made. It had to be shaped by action. So I began with the smallest piece I could find. That piece was survival. I needed shelter, food, safety, and a routine that kept my child anchored. It sounds simple, but at that time it felt monumental. But every future begins with something small, and that is what I held onto. I filled out forms for assistance and it felt overwhelming, yet I did it anyway. I showed up to jobs that paid little but offered a chance for income and stability. When I did not know how to stretch what I earned, I learned as I went. I studied my life like a puzzle and searched for ways to fit pieces together. Sometimes it meant waking up before dawn. Sometimes it meant eating less so my child could eat more. Sometimes it meant working while exhausted. Sometimes it meant asking for help and facing the sting of pride that did not want to bend. Each action was a piece added to the structure I was building. It was not pretty, but it was progress. Building a future out of broken pieces means accepting that nothing about the beginning will be smooth. You will bleed from the edges that cut you. You will ache from the weight you carry. You will wonder if the effort will ever lead to something solid. I felt all of that. There were days when I stared at my reflection and wondered who the woman looking back at me had become. Yet even on those days I kept going because standing still felt too much like giving up. Movement became my promise to myself that the brokenness would not be permanent. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that rebuilding starts with what you have, not what you wish you had. I had to work with the pieces life left in my hands. And those pieces were enough even though they did not feel like it. I used my determination as mortar. I used my hope as a blueprint. I used my love for my child as the fuel that kept me from collapsing. I took each worry, each setback, and each tiny victory and learned how to fit them into the growing shape of a new life. Often I sat in a small room at night with the soft hum of distant traffic drifting through the window while my child slept beside me. In that quiet space I would close my eyes and picture the life I wanted to build. I wanted stability. I wanted peace. I wanted a home that felt safe. I wanted a life where I could breathe without fear tightening my chest. Imagining it gave me strength. It reminded me why I was working so hard. A future might feel far away, but it becomes closer every time you take a step toward it. As I worked those long days and restless nights, I began to understand something deeper. Broken pieces can be arranged in ways that create something stronger than the original. When you rebuild after being shattered, you choose every piece with intention. You learn what matters. You learn what can be left behind. You learn what should be carried forward. I left behind shame. I left behind guilt that did not belong to me. I left behind the belief that I was unworthy of love or stability. Those were pieces I refused to use. I chose pieces made from resilience. Pieces made from faith. Pieces made from a fierceness I had never known before. I built with those. There were times when setbacks hit me so hard I felt the old fear rise again. A bill I could not cover on time. A job that cut back my hours. A moment when my child was sick and I had to choose between rest and another shift. Each setback felt like someone had knocked over the structure I was trying so desperately to build. But even then I picked the pieces back up. Because that is what building a future demands. Persistence. You do not walk away when the first wall falls. You rebuild it stronger. I learned skills I never imagined I would need. Budgeting, stretching, food, repairing small things in the room, finding free resources, learning how to connect with programs that supported single parents. I learned how to fill out paperwork I once found intimidating. I learned how to navigate the systems that held opportunities hidden behind long lines and complicated questions. Every skill was another brick in the life I was creating. And as I grew stronger, my child grew right along with me. Children feel the energy around them. As I built a future, I watched my child gain a sense of safety, a sense of routine, a sense of peace that had not been possible in the place we left behind. My child flourished because I refused to quit. Because every piece I picked up became part of a life that honored both of us. The beautiful truth is that a future built from brokenness carries a strength that cannot be easily shaken. It is a future forged in fire, shaped through effort and held together by purpose. You appreciate every small victory because you remember the nights when you wondered if victory was even possible. You stand taller because you remember crawling. You hold on to hope because you know what it feels like to almost lose it. 1 year after being thrown out, I looked around our small apartment and realized something I never thought I would feel again. Pride. Not the pride that comes from showing off, but the pride that comes from survival and transformation. The pride that whispers you did it. The pride that reminds you that even if life tried to break you into pieces, you gathered those pieces and built a home, a future, and a sense of self that no one could ever take away again. When you build a future out of broken pieces, you become unshakable. You know your own strength because you have tested it in the darkest moments. You know your own power because you have risen from the places that tried to bury you. And you know your own worth because you created a future that reflects it piece by piece, step by step, day by day. That is what it means to build. It is slow, it is hard, it is painful, but it is also beautiful. And when you stand in the life you created with your own hands, you realize that every broken piece was not the end. It was the beginning. Surround yourself with people who speak life, not poison. That truth became one of the most important lessons I learned during the long climb out of the dark place where my life had collapsed. When I first found myself alone with my child and nothing but the echo of someone else's hatred sitting in my chest, I realized how fragile my spirit had become. Words had been used against me like weapons. They cut deep and left scars that were not visible but felt like they were carved under my ribs. And I knew that if I wanted to build a new life, I could not do it around people who carry the same kind of venom. In those early months, I noticed how quickly negativity could grow in a wounded heart. If someone spoke doubt, I felt it sink into me like a stone. If someone hinted that I would fail, I felt my hands shake. If someone said that my child would always struggle because of the circumstances that had been forced on us, I felt fear crawl up my spine. That is what toxic voices do. They feed on uncertainty. They wrap themselves around your pain and try to convince you that the pain defines you. I had lived with that poison for too long, and I knew I had to protect my spirit like someone guarding the last flame of a dying fire. The truth is that the people you surround yourself with can either rebuild you or break you even further. They can plant hope or they can plant despair. And when you are rising from the ashes, you cannot afford to stand beside those who want to drag you back down into the smoke. So I made a choice. I decided to be intentional about who had access to my energy. I did not have much strength at that time, so whatever I had could not be wasted. It needed to be nurtured, protected, fed with care. At first this was difficult because the world does not always offer kindness freely. I had to learn to look deeper at the people around me. I had to learn to recognize the difference between someone who offered help with a generous heart and someone who pretended to help only to keep me small. There were people who spoke sweetly but carried judgment in their eyes. There were people who offered advice that was coated in negativity. There were people who liked to remind me of everything that had gone wrong instead of encouraging me to find what could go right. I began to gently but firmly distance myself from them. My future was too precious to be built on toxic ground. Then there were others. People who did not treat me like a lost cause. People who spoke to me with respect. People who said you are doing the best you can and your best matters. Their words felt like warm light on my skin. They reminded me that even though life had torn me apart, someone still believed in my ability to rise. These were not perfect people. They did not solve all my problems. But they stood beside me in a way that helped me breathe easier. Their presence felt steady and their encouragement helped me keep moving. I met a woman at the shelter who told me one night that strength grows faster when it has company. She had lived through hardship of her own. She did not pity me. She understood me. She shared food with me when I barely had enough for myself. She watched my child for a few minutes when I needed to walk outside and breathe. She spoke life into me when my thoughts were tangled in fear. She told me that survival is not meant to be lonely. Her voice was gentle and real. Her kindness stayed with me long after we parted ways. There were staff members who helped me fill out paperwork with patience instead of irritation. There were strangers who smiled at my child and reminded me that the world still held goodness. There were coworkers who saw how hard I was trying and offered encouragement for small victories. These people spoke life through simple acts and simple words. Their presence became part of the foundation I was building beneath my feet. As I grew stronger, I realized that I needed to become my own protector. Not only for myself but for my child. A child's world is shaped by the voices they hear and the energy they absorb. I wanted my child to grow up in a world where encouragement was louder than criticism. I wanted them to learn that they deserved to be surrounded by people who believed in their potential, not by people who predicted their failure. Children learn self-worth from the environment around them, so I knew our environment had to be filled with love and strength and positive voices. I learned how to say no to people who drained me. It was not easy. Some of them had been in my life for years. Some were family, some were friends I had known forever. But the truth is that history does not make someone healthy for you. If their words chipped away at my confidence, I had to let them go. If their presence filled my home with tension, I had to create distance. I was not shutting them out of anger. I was protecting the fragile hope I was nurturing inside myself. My life could not grow in soil poisoned with negativity. One of the hardest boundaries I set was learning not to let people speak failure over my child. If someone tried to say that my child would struggle because of me or because of the environment we had escaped, I would shut it down with quiet certainty. I would not let anyone predict doom for my child. I would not let anyone shape their future with words dipped in fear or judgment. My child deserved better than that. And I deserved the right to raise them without carrying the weight of someone else's negativity. With time, I found that the people who spoke life into me became like anchors during storms. Whenever I felt myself slipping into doubt, their words pulled me back toward solid ground. They reminded me of how far I had come. They reminded me of the strength it took to survive. They reminded me that building a future was not only possible but already happening in every step I took. Positive voices do not erase struggle, but they make the struggle feel less impossible. I also discovered that surrounding myself with life-giving people changed the way I spoke to myself. I became softer, kinder, more patient. Instead of telling myself I would fail, I began to tell myself that I was learning. Instead of telling myself I was alone, I reminded myself that I was supported. Instead of telling myself I was weak, I affirmed that I was growing stronger every day. The voices around us shape the voice inside us, and once the inner voice begins to heal, everything else begins to shift. Eventually, I began attracting people who lived with purpose and kindness. People who dreamed big. People who had survived storms and refused to be defined by them. People who loved deeply, who listened with empathy, who believed in building instead of breaking. Being around them lifted me in ways I did not even know I needed. Their energy helped me flourish. Their words reminded me that life could still hold beauty. Their presence showed me that not all relationships were meant to harm. Some were meant to heal. 1 year after being thrown out, I looked around my life and realized something profound. The people I had chosen to keep close were the reason I had been able to rebuild. They were not the architects of my future. That work was mine, but they were the steady hands that held the ladder while I climbed. They were the gentle voices that told me to keep going when the path grew steep. They were the reminders that love still existed even after someone tried to convince me otherwise. Surround yourself with people who speak life, not poison. Because the voices you listen to will become the soundtrack of your future. Choose voices that uplift. Choose voices that encourage. Choose voices that remind you of who you are becoming, not who you used to be. When you fill your life with positive energy, your heart becomes lighter, your steps become stronger, and your path becomes clearer. And you realize that no matter how dark your past was, the right people can help you walk toward the light again. 1 year can change everything if you change, and I learned that truth step by difficult step until it lived in my bones and breathed in my spirit. When people talk about time, they always act like time is some miracle worker that floats down and fixes your life while you sit on the couch doing nothing. Baby, that is not how it works. Time is only powerful when you decide to rise up and move with it. Time is like a river and you can let it pull you backwards or you can plant your feet and push forward until you find calm water. A year is long enough to shift your entire existence, but only if you show up for your own life. When that man threw me out and spit those ugly words at me, I stood on the sidewalk with my baby in my arms, and for a moment I believed him. I believed that my life was over. I believed that my kid had already been labeled forever. I believed I was ruined. But then something inside me woke up. It was small at first, like a whisper. It said, "Get up, girl. Take one step. Do not worry about the next step yet. Just move." And that tiny whisper became the voice that carried me through the next 12 months. Change begins with a choice so quiet no one even hears it. But it grows. Lord, it grows. During that first week I was shaking. Fear can make your body feel heavier than your own weight. Fear can make the light around you look darker than midnight. But I kept moving. I found a place to stay. It was not fancy and it was not comfortable, but it was a roof. And sometimes starting over means living in a place where the paint is peeling and the heater sounds like it wants to quit life. But even the roughest shelter can hold the seeds of a new beginning. Every night I would look at my baby asleep beside me and something fierce would rise in my chest. I said to myself, 1 year from now we will not be here. 1 year from now our life will not be shaped by his cruelty. 1 year from now we will stand on our own feet. The first month was about survival. I worked whatever hours I could get. I said yes to jobs that never said thank you. I stretched every dollar until it felt like it might tear in half. But the thing about struggle is this. Struggle builds a special kind of strength that comfort never will. Struggle does not ask for permission. It arrives. And when it leaves behind a backbone that can carry mountains. I learned how to negotiate. I learned how to problem solve. I learned how to breathe through panic. I learned that I can do hard things. So can you. Around the 3rd month something shifted. I stopped waking up in fear and started waking up with intention. I told myself, this year is mine. I will not let shame guide me. I will not let bitterness shape me. I will not let anger run my life. Instead I would let purpose lead. I would let love raise my child, not despise. And I would let hope build the path in front of me. When you make that kind of decision you feel it in your walk. It changes how you talk to yourself. It changes how you talk to others. It changes how you see what is possible. By the 5th month I had learned new skills. I signed up for classes. I practiced every night after my baby went to sleep. Sometimes I would be so tired I felt like my soul wanted to lay flat on the floor, but I kept going because I knew our future depended on my growth. That is what people forget. Growth is not pretty. It is not gentle. Growth is raw and sweaty and stubborn. Growth shows up when you are lonely. Growth knocks on your door when you just want to rest. Growth drags you forward even when you whisper, "I cannot." And yet you do. Somehow you do. By the 7th month my confidence had returned. Not the loud kind that needs applause, but the quiet kind that settles deep in your spirit and whispers you are capable. You are worthy. You are healing. I could feel the old version of me falling away piece by piece. The version of me that accepted insults as truth had vanished. The version of me that believed I was trapped had dissolved. I was building a new woman one day at a time. A woman who believed in herself. A woman who protected her peace. A woman who would teach her child by example that strength is not something you are born with but something you build. By the 9th month doors started opening. Opportunities found me. People who believed in me extended their hands. I was offered a better job. A safer space. A chance to breathe again. It is funny how life works. When you stop chasing the approval of the one who broke you, blessings start landing right at your feet. I realized then that the universe had been waiting for me to step into my worth. By the 10th month I could look in the mirror without seeing damage. I saw resilience. I saw courage. I saw a mother who fought her way through hell with grace even when grace felt far away. I saw a woman who refused to let her child inherit the pain that was thrown at her. My baby was growing healthy and happy. Their laughter filled our tiny home, and every giggle reminded me that I had won a battle many people lose. I had refused to let hatred take root in our lives. By the 11th month I felt something strange. Something gentle. Something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt proud. Not arrogant proud but grateful proud. Proud of the steps I took. Proud of the nights I survived. Proud of the mornings I showed up even when my heart felt heavy. Proud of the choices I made to keep moving forward. Pride can heal wounds that nothing else touches. And now we reach the 1-year mark. The moment when I could look back at the woman standing on that sidewalk holding her child with tears burning her face and say, "Girl, you made it." 1 year changed everything. Not because time fixed it. Time did nothing until I decided to rise. The change happened because I chose to grow. I chose to heal. I chose to build. I chose to love my baby enough to break every curse that was spoken over us. 1 year later we are standing in a home filled with peace. Not perfection but peace. I have a job that provides stability. I have friends who speak life into me. I have a future that feels bright. And most important, I have a sense of self that no one can take from me again. So hear me now. 1 year can change everything if you change. If you rise. If you choose yourself. If you do not let the voice of someone cruel shape your destiny. If you decide that your child will inherit strength, not shame. Growth takes time. Healing takes time. But both are possible if you take the first step. Do not wait for someone to save you. Save yourself. Do not wait for approval. Approve your own worth. Do not wait for perfect conditions. Begin where you are with what you have. Because 1 year from now your life can look so different you might not even recognize it. And you will stand tall knowing you built that difference with your own 2 hands. 1 year changed me. 1 year can change you too.